Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to EC Design School and Gingham Services for arranging this event. My name is Luke and I work at UCA. My job is to help any students who want to apply to any of the degree courses we have at UCA. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Gavin Lewis. Gavin is the Senior Lecturer in Games Animation from the School of Games and Creative Technology. And he will do a presentation with you today. I will also supply my contact details because if any of you are interested in making an application to UCA, then I can help you with that process. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to EC Design School, and I will pass you over to Gavin.
Great, thank you, Luke. So yeah, hello everyone. Ni men hao. Hope you're all doing well. So yeah, I will just share my screen here so that you can see my presentation here. So yeah, basically, yeah, as Luke said, my name's Gavin Lewis, and I teach here at the University for the Creative Arts, and my area is animation for games, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm just going to give you basically a very kind of brief overview of animation for video games. So before I do that, I just want to give you like a quick introduction to myself and my own background. So I actually I started off in the film industry, working on visual effects for films. And the first film I worked on was the fourth Harry Potter film. I worked on for about 6 months, and then I worked on a series called Walking with Monsters, which was a television series, and then a film called Happy Feet. I don't know if any of you have seen Happy Feet, but with lots of dancing penguins. So I went to Sydney, Australia, to work on that, which was a lot of fun. I was a lighting artist on Happy Feet. And then a film called 10,000 BC, and then another film called Sweeney Todd, which was directed by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp, and then finally the second Narnia film, excuse me, from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series. So after that, I then went into working in motion capture. So I worked on motion capture for games, particularly facial animation capture. So this is a shoot that I worked on for I think this was the final Harry Potter game, working with the Electronic Arts on this. So the game came out for the Nintendo Wii, and we were capturing all the animations for that. So after that, I started lecturing. I've been lecturing in animation and animation for video games since then. But yeah, to get started, what I wanted to do was just have like a really very broad question here, which is, what is animation? So it's a very, very general question. And I wanted you to think about, if you had to define animation as a definition for what would you come up with? And there's two kind of key ideas that I really want you to think about when you're thinking about what animation is. So the first of those is, when we think about animation, we think of animation as an optical illusion, basically. So it's an illusion, it's a visual illusion. So we have something like visual illusions like this. You can see in this image here, we have a dip in the floor here. So I don't know if someone's put their microphone on. It's a bit here, so the microphone in the background. But yeah, we have something like this where it appears to the eye there's a dip in the floor here, but actually there's no dip. It's just a texture on the surface. We have something like this where it appears that there's these lines kind of are bending perhaps, and when in reality they're actually completely straight. Something like this. If you look into the center here, it may appear to you that the dot that's going around the outside, if you keep your eye in the center, appears to be green, when in reality it's just gray. And then finally, something like this where again, I don't know what the frame rate is that you can see this at. So it might look a little bit jumpy. It might not look as smooth as it should. But essentially, we have something that appears to be a bouncing ball, when in reality, it's just a series of still images which are played one after the other. So the reason this works is that your brain, when we look at the world outside, we're not actually seeing what's there in the world outside. Our brain and our visual system is making a lot of assumptions about what's going on in the world outside. And one of those assumptions is that if we see a series of still images played very quickly one after the other, and those images are related, it appears that there's motion happening there. It interprets those still images as a single moving object, basically. And it's lucky that that happens, because if it didn't, we wouldn't have film, we wouldn't have television, we wouldn't have video games. So that's the first idea around what animation is. It's animation as the illusion of movement, basically. Now, that kind of definition of animation is actually quite new. So it's not like the original definition of animation. It probably only came about, in the 1800s. People started experimenting with devices like this one. This is called the phenakistoscope, a very long name for it. But essentially, this toy was used to kind of create the illusion of movement. It's one of the very earliest pieces of animation as we know it today. We came about with toys like this. But the word animation is actually much older than this. So the word as we use it in English anyway comes from the Latin for anima, and so the Romans actually had a word for animation. But obviously the Romans weren't sitting around watching Disney films. So what did they mean when they were talking about animation, or to be animated? They meant things like this. So the breath, the life, and the soul, and the spirit. And we still use this kind of definition of animation sometimes in English. So you might be reading English at some point and you come across like a phrase like, this person was very animated. And what they mean is that, they're moving a lot. They're moving around. They can't sit still. But this definition, this original definition of animation, is actually really important for when we teach animation, either for film or for games, because it really comes down to maybe the more important kind of thing we're trying to do with animation, which is we're trying to create the illusion, not just that a character is moving, but that character actually has thoughts and feelings and emotions. So at a very basic level, just moving a character is enough. But beyond that, we're trying to create something that's even more kind of important, which is that character is alive, essentially. So I'm just going to show you an example of this. This is actually not animation. This is actually puppetry. But puppetry is very, very similar to animation, and it has the same goal. So this example I'm going to show you is from a play that was out about a little while ago called War Horse, and it's one of the puppets which they used on in the play. In the stage production, but it kind of really illustrates what I want to get across as the kind of the true meaning of animation. So if I just play this for maybe a minute. There we go, I'll put the sound down. So, I think what's really interesting about, this example here is it shows, if you wanted to create maybe some, animals for a stage production, you might think that you needed to create them animals that look extremely realistic. But in fact, this puppet here doesn't really look like a real horse, and yet, as an audience, you're able to kind of believe that this horse actually has feelings and has emotions, and I think that demonstrates just how important the way that the characters move is, and that's really the essence of what we're trying to do in animation is is to create a character that moves such that the audience is able to pretend to actually kind of be convinced by the thoughts and feelings of that character. So let's carry on here. So this is the kind of like I say, the true meaning of animation. It's about the illusion of life, essentially. That's kind of what we're really aiming for here. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, a high level overview of kind of what our goals are as animators. And that's for TV or for games. It's exactly the same if we're talking about games animation as if we're talking about television and film. But what I'd also like to talk about is how do we actually go in and create that kind of animation? Particularly using computers in 3D. How do we do that? So the 3D animation, there's two main ways that we go about creating the animation. So one of them is called hand-keyed animation, and the second one is motion capture. And if we start off with the hand-keyed animation, in order to understand kind of hand-keyed animation, we need to talk about what a keyframe is, really. And this is really important for animation. Keyframes are the main kind of thing we use when we're animating, basically. So what a keyframe is how we tell the computer how to animate that character. So what we might have, if let's say we wanted this character to move their arm up like this, we might go to the first frame in the animation, say frame 1, and we'd pose the character in this pose. And then we might go on like a second later, so maybe about 24 frames later if we're working on film, and we put another keyframe in here. So we'd pose the character with their arm up, and we tell the computer this is another keyframe, and I want, frame 24, I want the character to be in this pose, and at frame 1, I want them to be in this pose. And then what we do is we let the computer to do what's called the in-betweening. So the computer goes in and does all the in-between frames, basically. So as an animator, we don't need to go in and set the, pose the character for every single frame. We'll let the computer do that in-betweening. So that's the essence of what we're doing when we're animating. We're picking a particular frame and we are, moving a character into a particular pose. So it sounds very simple, but in order to to do that to a high level, so if I show you this animation here, this was created by one of my students, a guy called Sankal Sharma, who's now gone on to work in industry and is working at I think Frontier Games. But to get the character to really look as if they're moving of their own choice, that they're not just simply being moved by someone, that they're actually obeying the laws of motion, that they're obeying physics and so on. That takes a lot of practice. So what can you do to actually get to that kind of level? How do you practice this keyframing? And what's really good is that there is a set of guidelines out there, if you like, and probably the most famous of these are what's called the 12 principles of animation. And so these were written about by the Disney animators, and there was 9 Disney animators they called the 9 old men, who were the kind of some of the original Disney animators. And if you imagine that the Walt Disney Company, they needed a way to train up their animators very quickly, because they, once they started working on films, they needed to create a lot of animation. They needed to train up those animators very quickly. And so they came up with this set of ideas which were designed to kind of help people understand how to create convincing animation as quickly as possible, essentially. So 2 of these 9 old men, they wrote about this in a book called The Illusion of Life. It's probably the most famous book on animation. So if you're interested in animation, it's definitely worth buying this book. But these are essentially the 12 principles of animation they talked about in this book. So we've got things like squash and stretch, anticipation staging, slow in and slow out, arcs, and so on. And these are the things that we talk about with our students and that you'll learn if you're learning animation. So, I mean, things like, squash and stretch is essentially the idea that you can squash and stretch a character, that they don't have to, stay rigid in terms of their overall form, And, in real life, objects do squash and stretch to a certain amount. But one of the nice things we can do in animation is we can exaggerate that to make it look more kind of cartoony, more interesting, more appealing, And that's one of the reasons why sometimes when you're watching, cartoons, they can look more fun, more engaging than real life. Anticipation is another really important one. So, the idea there is that if I'm doing something like I'm throwing a ball, if I want to strengthen that movement, if I pull my hand back a long way beforehand, not only does it look more realistic, because in real life you do have to move the hand back, but it gives the movement more impact, basically. And it also draws the audience's eye to the right thing, the thing they should be looking at. If you want to see the audience to see the action, adding anticipation will help that. So these are a couple of the ideas that, as if you're starting out in animation, that you'll learn when to apply these ideas and how important they are and the right time to apply each one. And this is the example from one of my first year animators. So obviously you can see here, they have an exercise which is to animate this ball moving around this environment. But if they're doing things like adding squash and stretch to this, it becomes much more appealing, applying anticipation and so on. Oh, I'm not sure what that is. Just ignore that. That must be one of the other animations. So yeah, that's the main, that's the first kind of way that we do animation. It's called hand-keyed animation because essentially we are going in and we're animating the character by hand. I mean, we're using a mouse, we're doing it on a computer, but we're doing it ourselves as an animator. We are creating all of the movement ourselves. So the second method that's used, in film and in games is called motion capture. So with motion capture, we're not starting off from scratch. What we're doing is we essentially get an actor. And we put them in a very tight-fitting suit, something like this, and then we basically cover them in markers like this, which go all over their body, and we'll put them in a large room like this, and we will put a lot of motion capture cameras in that room. So these are special cameras that send out infrared light. And the infrared light reflects off these markers and then is picked up again by the cameras. And once two of the cameras, you need a minimum of 2 cameras to be able to see a marker. Once at least 2 of the cameras can see a marker, then they can work out the position of that marker in space. And essentially, we capture the movement of our actor in this way. So I'll show you some examples. These are examples from the game Uncharted, where they're capturing the movement of the actors for the game. This is they've got a Vicon system here, which is the same as the system we have here. We have a Vicon system at UCA as well, which we use to capture the motions. So one of the really important things to understand with motion capture is that generally motion capture is only the start of the process. So you'll capture the motion of your actors, but you'll always need to enhance that motion afterwards. So the things I talked about, the 12 principles of animation, still definitely apply here. But what will happen is the animator will bring this animation into the software, and they'll then, basically work on top of that animation. So, whether you've watched a film like The Lord of the Rings or anything where they've used motion capture in it, you're always watching the animation. It's been worked on a lot by the animators. They've enhanced the animation and pushed it beyond the motion that's been captured by the actors here. So yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages of motion capture, and I don't know if you could have a little think, see what you can think. Some of the advantages are of using motion capture as opposed to doing it by hand. One of the main advantages I would say is you get very realistic motion and very subtle motion as well with motion capture. I mean, good animators can recreate that by hand, but it's definitely much more difficult to do that by hand. It's something that requires a lot of time and a lot of expertise at doing. Whereas with motion capture, you can put an actor in there and you'll get all those small subtleties. Things like breath, breathing it's very hard to recreate convincingly when you're doing it by hand, which you get naturally when you're doing motion capture. And potentially it's a quicker process, potentially. So you can put an actor in a suit and capture a lot of animation. Like I say, you will have to work on it afterwards, so it's not necessarily simply a case of just capturing it. That's it. But it can be quicker. But there are disadvantages to motion capture as well. So one of the disadvantages is that it's very hard to capture non-human characters. So I mean, you can do it. So this is for a game that came out last year called Stray, where you play a cat, basically. So for this, they decided they would motion capture a lot of the animations for this. And so, they got a lot of adorable, cute-looking cats, and they've obviously put markers on the body, and they've been able to capture the motions that way. But, it's not necessarily ideal. capturing, working with animals is very difficult, and so you can do it sometimes, but other times it's more hard. But then you also get situations where you want to capture animations for creatures that don't even exist, that aren't out there. So there's no way you could we can bring a dragon in and motion capture the animations for these. So obviously all of these creatures, they're mythical creatures, they're not real. These are obviously all hand animated. There's no way that you could motion capture these kinds of animations. Another situation you have is that you have characters which are not necessarily, they're human, but you don't want realistic animations on them. So, it's a cartoony look, a cartoony feel you're going for, So Mario is not a particularly realistic looking human. He's a very cartoony looking character. And so we want the animations to be cartoony as well. And again, motion captured animations would not be appropriate for this kind of motion. So again, these would be hand animated. So yeah, that's a kind of, I guess, a description of the two key main methods we use for capturing and creating animations, and that's true for television, film, and also games. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what are the main differences. I mean, one of the questions you might have then is what are the key differences between animation for film and television versus animation for games? Why might you go and study animation as opposed to games animation? And essentially, I would say they are very similar. And if you're studying animation for games, you will learn a lot of the same stuff as you would studying a traditional animation course. But with animation for games, we have really, I guess, two main areas of animation: cutscene animation, so animation for the parts that generally play between the gameplay, and also gameplay animation. And they're kind of different the way we approach those two. So I'd say for cutscene animation, really there are very little differences between the kinds of animation you would be doing for cutscene animation and the kind of animation you would be doing for a feature film or something. The way you do it, the way you approach it is very similar. There's no massive differences there. The main difference would come when you're working on animation for gameplay, and here there are a fair few differences. So obviously for gameplay animation, you have quite a few differences in that essentially, the game engine is dealing with a lot of the animation process here. So the way that we create animations for gameplay is that we create it in short loops, short animation loops. So we might create a run cycle, or we might create a jump cycle, and then we allow the engine to blend that together, basically. And we can work with the engine the game engine to work out how that happens, but essentially we're working with the engine to create the final result. And also a big difference is that essentially, you're preparing the animations, but the animations only really get performed when the player actually plays the character. So with traditional animation for film, you have complete control over how that performance happens. You know exactly where the camera's going to be, you know exactly what the character's going to do. But for games, it's quite different, because you don't necessarily know that. A lot of that is taken out of your control, and you don't necessarily know exactly what the player's going to do. Where the player's going to do a particular jump or a particular run, and so you're kind of you're preparing the animations ahead of time, and it's really down to the player as to where those happen. So it does create difficulties. It creates a more kind of complicated situation. And these are just kind of things you have to factor in when you're creating the animations for games. Still, again, those animation principles we talked about do definitely apply. So here, one of the principles we talk about with animation is creating strong silhouettes. And you can see here in God of War, before we have the axe throw, we have a very strong kind of silhouette of the character. So when I'm talking about silhouettes, what I mean is that the kind of outline of the character needs to look strong and dynamic. That's very similar for games, but it's, of course, it's more difficult because we don't necessarily know in a game where the camera moves around the character. That may not be possible. Other things like anticipation may be difficult. So I talked before about how when we have a movement animation, we want to bring in anticipation to strengthen that movement. Again, with games, that can be difficult because that will affect the game, the way the character feels. So the way the character feels is another really big consideration, basically. So game feel is something we need to factor in when we're thinking about animation for games, because that's all about the way that the character feels. And there's a really great book that's been written about this by a guy called Steve Swink. It's called Game Feel, and it sort of talks about the kind of tactile feel of games. So if you're playing as two different characters, if you're playing as Mario, that character feels very different to a character like Sonic. The way they move around in the game feels very different. So with Mario, they're quite responsive. If you move the joystick left and right, the character will move left and right, relatively quickly. With Sonic, they're much less responsive. They take more time to build up their speed, but they're much faster. They have a much higher top speed. So with Sonic, if you were to press right and make the character move right from a standing position, they will take time to speed up. But once they get going, they move very much quicker. So again, these just create different feels for these two characters, and that comes through in the way the characters move, and it's the animation is obviously very, very important to that, and that's something we need to factor in when we're working with animation for games. Great, so that's that's kind of just a general overview, I guess, of the kind of key ideas that we're dealing with when we're thinking about animation for games. What I wanted to kind of finish with was just a few kind of descriptions of kind of the things that we're doing when we're teaching animation for games on our games animation course here at UCA. So one of the really great things is we've very recently had a lot of investment in our course here. We've just had £2 million worth of investment a year ago, and we've been able to, with that, purchase a lot of cool, really great stuff. So this is our motion capture studio. And here I am. This is actually the first time we got to use the motion capture studio. We've got a brand new Vicon system. It's got 20 cameras, which is a good number of cameras for a university, which means we can capture really, really great animations with it. And so here we are. We're setting up the system here. These are some of our games animation students here, just trying it out. And this is it. We've actually just recently we moved it to a new location now. So this is our new location. These are my second year games animation students, and they're capturing some animations here for a game we're working on. They're not actually hurting each other here. This is all just pretend. So don't worry. There's no one's injured here. But yeah, this is a project they've just been working on recently, which has been a lot of fun to work on. This is us. This is again more of our second year animation students, and what we're doing here is we're outside. We're capturing reference footage for doing run cycles, basically. So one thing that's really important, aside from the 12 principles of animation I talked about earlier, is looking at the human body. How does the human body actually move? If you're animating a run cycle, you want to have really good reference footage of that. And so we're capturing as good cycles as we can, so we can look at it back and really study that motion. Another really fantastic bit of kit we've also got is the virtual production stage. So virtual production is it's kind of a subsequent, a follow-on to green screen. So green screen is where you would shoot an actor, film an actor in front of a green screen, and you would then remove the green screen. This is now being kind of replaced with something like this, which is called a virtual production screen. And essentially it's a giant LED screen, and we have a video camera here, which is the position of the video camera is tracked, and then we can display a CG, a computer generated environment on the screen. And as the camera moves, the render of the CG screen, the computer generated environment, gets updated to basically look as if the real actor that would be stood there is in the real place. So it's quite a new bit of kit, and it was used quite famously on The Mandalorian, if you've seen that on the Disney Channel over here. The television series, they use this virtual production technology quite a lot, and we now have it here and we're able to use it. So it's very exciting to be able to work on that. And these are some of our students, again, working on a music video, excuse me, using the virtual production screen. So that's really, really great. So finally, I'm just going to show you some of our student work. Unfortunately, our games animation hasn't yet gone through to a third year. So it's a relatively new course. So we've only got second year. So the work I'm going to show you is from our final year students for our other games courses here at the university. But these are on the kind of the games arts course from our students last year. But I think there's some really fantastic work here that we're really very proud of. The work that our students are creating. So we're very proud to be able to show that off to you here. So yeah, essentially that's the end of my presentation. So yeah, I'd like to thank you for listening to that. If you do have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. This is my email here. I'm more than happy for you to ask me now or to contact me. But yeah, I'll hand you back to Luke if that's okay. So yeah, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen and just hand you back to Luke now. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Daphne, do you want to facilitate any questions the students might have?
Okay, so 请问一下你们有没有对于老师刚刚讲的一些，或者是你们对 animation 啊，或者是那个 game animation 有没有什么样子的一些问题啊？所以现在都可以让你们大家提出，然后如果说你们自己可能本身有一些可能在学 animation 里面，你们可能有碰到哪些的问题，都可以趁着现在教授有在线上，也都可以问老师。有没有同学有什么样子的问题？有没有想要问谁的？你有比较认识谁的吗？那个谁是学 animation 的 ？Yeah, hold on. I just check some students.
同学有没有就是有准备作品想要给教授来看一下你的作品的？
你们有谁如果说有准备 animation 方面的作品，可以请 Gavin 可以帮你们看一下，要吗？
同学可以开麦克风提问哦。如果不知道怎么用英文来提问的话，可以
你讲中文，然后我们试着来去帮你问教授。
我有问题，我有问题。
好，什么问题？
想问就是现在业界用的软体，因为刚刚看到蛮多，好像有做追踪，然后绿幕，然后想大概知道现在就是他们工作都用什么软体。
Okay. Gavin, okay, one student, she's asking, so what kind of software? What kind of software in this industry you are using right now? So,
yeah, good question. So by far the most common one is Maya. It's called so Autodesk Maya is the most common one for animation. So there's a few different kind of softwares that are out there. So 3ds Max, Maya, Blender is a free software. Basically, it's open source, so that means anyone can download it. It's called Blender. That is getting used more and more. So progressively, even some professional companies now are using Blender. It used to be that Blender was just kind of used for the people at home who couldn't afford a proper license for one of the paid packages. But Blender is being used more and more. But for now, definitely Maya is still the most common one, and particularly for animation. So for animation. So for modeling, and each discipline has its own kind of favorite package, but for animation, it's definitely Maya. And for the game engine side, it's Unreal is probably becoming the most used one. So the big two packages software from the game engine side is Unity and Unreal. And Unity used to be kind of, I guess, more popular for the kind of indie game, like the less AAA big budget games. But it's now getting to be that Unreal, is kind of even kind of taking over that space as well. So yeah, that's a good one. Just there's one other package as well. There's another package called Motion Builder, which is used a lot for motion capture, and that's another package we teach quite a bit, because it makes if you've got knowledge of that software, it makes you quite employable. So the games companies love to have that. It's not one that's taught, I don't think, many other places. So I guess it's quite good that we're able to teach that one as well.
有其他什么？还没有谁有其他什么样子的问题？趁着现在老师有在线上哦。
我有问题。
好，那你要用英文问吗？欢迎用英文问。Okay.
My question is that if we are applying for the game design portfolio, do we need to include our work that is made by Unity?
Yeah, good question. No, basically no. So one of the things people often ask is, for like the games animation course, for example, do you need to include animations in your portfolio? And what I say is, or if you're applying for games design, do you need to include games made in Unity in your portfolio? I mean, what I say is, if you have them, that's great. But what we're really looking for is the potential of students. So for me, for the animation course, for the games animation course, if you can show that you have good pieces in your portfolio, whatever medium they're in, so if they're drawings, sculpture, whatever you've been doing, if you can show that you've achieved a good level in that medium, then I can see that you're probably going to do well on the animation course, the games animation course, because you've if you're able to apply yourself in one area, it's quite likely you'll be able to apply yourself in another area. So we don't expect you to have already learned the skills we'll be teaching you on the course before you come on the course, basically. So for things like the games design, you don't have to have already used Unity before the course, or Unreal. We will teach you that on the course. But if you can show us that you have ability in whatever field it is, that's what we're looking for, really.
Can I just add in there that many of the students that are applying to courses quite often will send me their portfolio before they even upload it to the admissions team. I can have a look at it. Sometimes I can refer to people like Gavin, have a look and give you some feedback before you even submit it. Lots of students get very worried about their portfolio and about it being perfect. And as Gavin has mentioned, they're not looking for perfect work, they're looking at potential. But it's very obvious that I can look at it before you even submit it to give you some more confidence. Maybe an applicant can send it to me and I can send back my thoughts, and then maybe you'll be slightly more confident when you're uploading your final portfolio. That can sometimes make you feel a little happier, and I'm happy to do that for any of you.
Right. I would also say one other thing about the portfolios is it's really helpful. The more information you can provide about the work you did and then what the work is, that's helpful. Sometimes people send a video and I don't really know what it is that you've done on that video. It could be, especially if it's a group project. If it's a group project, we need to know exactly what you've done. But even if it's something you've done yourself, if you can describe exactly what you did, it's going to be helpful, because it can be difficult kind of knowing what it is we're supposed to be looking at without that description.
I speak to so many students, and when they show me their portfolio and I suggest they leave their initial sketches in, they're almost embarrassed sketches in, but I say that's really, really important, because it shows the journey that you've been on within that project. So you should include, to show how you've developed. It may have been a 2D sketch that ended up being a sculpture. It shows your growth in your own journey, and Gavin and the team can then see that potential a lot easier. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Okay, so if some students, if they have different background, or probably from product design or from graphic design, but later on, they want to just study like animation or game animation. So can they just include their original design into the portfolio? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, if they have, work that, like I say, that's good, and we can see that, so we recruit from quite a broad base, and particularly, I think, particularly games animation does cover quite a broad field of kind of quite technical and also more kind of arty, kind of creative side. So it's quite a range of kind of skills that you can be as a games animator. So yeah, I would say, if you're from a field where you feel, oh, does it actually suit? I don't think that's a problem, because yeah, like I say, we do recruit from quite a broad kind of range of different disciplines.
And can I just add that I think that if somebody's coming from a slightly different discipline previously, the portfolio perhaps becomes even more important, and therefore the explanation of the work that you've done and how that might be linked to games animation or regular animation would be useful. There is also the option, if somebody's from a wildly different discipline, then we have the pre-masters program, which would be a chance to spend a year preparing and using the software to be able to go on directly to the MA or to a BA if you did a foundation. So yes, certainly people can't be written off just because they haven't specifically studied those disciplines.
同学还有什么问题的吗？
有，我有问题。
OK， 好，用英文问哦，给你机会。
好，the students' work I saw are all professional. How long does it usually take to study to reach that level?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends, very much depends on the student, the student I showed at the beginning, the kind of dance animation I showed, that was a Sandkelp. I think that was from their final year, but I think, they were quite naturally talented, I guess. So, they did, not all students necessarily are able to get to that level so quickly. It does take, some students longer. But it's a very difficult kind of answer in a way, because you're always progressing all through your life, and you never reach the kind of level where you're like, I'm here, I've achieved, I've got there. So they were, some students are able to go on and get a job straight away, after their degree, and they're ready to get a degree. Some students, it may take them another couple of years, and some students decide they're going to go on and do a master's afterwards, and maybe that will kind of give them that extra time to kind of develop those skills. So yeah, there's no single answer, I'm afraid. Sorry, but you will get there. Basically, that's the point, I think. Can I? Yeah.
Can I just? Yeah. So I think one important aspect which Gavin would support is that UCA degree courses are all heavily practical. So the whole idea behind what we do is, I'm usually suggesting to applicants that on their degree courses, maybe less business courses, but general courses are probably between 60 to 70% practical in studio space working on projects. So the fact that students spend a lot of time in studio space in the kind of areas that Gavin's shown you means you're already developing kind of practical skills, and we're kind of trying to recreate a work environment. So employment after graduation is very, very important to UCA. So whether it be professionals coming in for guest lectures, whether it be national UK companies using our students on live projects and briefs, there is a real push towards you. Our assumption is you are going to have a career in the creative arts. It's not just a degree that you're going to use for something else. Our assumption is you want to work within industry, and that's a major focus for UCA. that maybe sets us apart from other universities. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
还有没有人还有什么问题想要问的？有没有人想要问奖学金呀？
If a person would like to be a concept artist, is it the first option to apply for the Department of Animation, or you will say it's something else or something?
So you're asking what you should apply for if you're interested in concept art?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. So yeah, we have a course here in the School of Games and Creative Technologies called Comic and Concept Art, which is it's a very popular course, and that's really geared towards those two things, concept art and also comics as well. So in the title it's comics and concept art, but that's the course I would recommend. It's predominantly 2D, so that there is a bit of 3D kind of work in that course, but it's mainly kind of 2D, quite kind of, I guess, skills focused. I mean, all of our courses are very skills focused, but this one is as well, giving you a kind of real grounding in the kind of the foundations of the kind of core skills you need, aesthetics and so on for being a concept artist. So yeah, I see Luke's just posted a link to the actual course, which is great, in the chat there. But yeah, that's the one I'd recommend for someone interested in concept art.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Great.
还有没有？还可以给2个问题吧，因为我们8点就有面试哦，有同学要有面试，要有 interview 了，所以可以赶快把握机会。老师也有在那个聊天室那里有留一些讯息哦。OK， 要 look，you can tell.
Okay, listen, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank EC Design School and Daphne from Gingham Services. Thank you to Gavin for his time today. It's really, really great to have met all of you. I'm really pleased you joined us this afternoon. Both Gavin and I have put our email addresses in the chat, so please get in touch with any questions you think of after today, and we would love to talk to you more. But thank you all for coming along today.
好 ，OK.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Gavin. Yeah.
Brilliant.
所以现在因为我们等一下8点还有面试，所以如果说你们现在要是没有问题的话，就可能可以先下线没关系。然后有任何的问题，等一下Maggie 要再先跟你们讲。
同学如果还有问题的话，都可以到那个一席的那个 line 去提问，我们也可以把问题再 pass 给教授，好不好？有问题都可以直接跟我们联系的。
好那我也留一下亲爱的跟一起的，好，来留一起哦哈。那是一起的人你要不要聊？他们知道哦好，你们都有一起的那种 line， 所以你们也可以把一些讯息就直接给一起这边留 line 这边，好不好 ？OK， 好，那就这样子哦。今天的就圆满的结束，所以你们可以先下线没问题。